So recently you may have seen on the channel that we done these two videos, which were the most fun healer to play and the most fun DPS to play. So I bet you can't guess what this video is. I bet you probably can. That's right, we're looking at the most fun tank to play. So let's introduce our contenders. First up, we have the Paladin. The Paladin is seen as the most versatile tank. It's a variation of the typical sword and board tank, but with spells. In Wrath of the Lich King, even its strength converts to spell power, which just shows you that it's not just hitting the mobs, it's all about that hybrid spellcaster melee style tanking. In terms of strength, it really is the most versatile class with an array of abilities that you can use. Lots of utility to help yourself and your raid, and brings one of the most powerful cooldowns in the game for your raid. Divine Guardian really can make or break hard mode progression, and you will see a lot of these being used, and it is one of the primary reasons we want Paladins in our raids. The Protection Paladin really does offer the most in the way of utility for your group. It has minimal ramp up in a fight and often has good burst threat when paired with Avenging Wrath. One of the downsides to this though is it's probably going to be the most common tank you'll see in Wrath of the Lich King, despite DKs being the hero class. In terms of weaknesses with the Protection Paladin, whilst being the most versatile and jack of all trades, they often aren't the best at anything besides ad tanking, often being used as a second or even third raid tank rather than the primary one to maximise utility. Another weakness is the fact that they're mana based, which isn't an infinite resource, and it can on rare circumstances become an issue. Some notable talents, spells or abilities would be the Paladin mount, which really fits in well with the whole Holy Knight type feel of the class. Avenging Wrath with the wings that come out that really feels like a powerful and influential spell. Of course, being able to bubble, which aside from its famed bubble half, is probably one of the most notable spells in WoW and a strong weapon in the Paladin's arsenal. An Avenging Shield, because who don't want to feel like Captain America? The next contender would be the Druid, largely unchanged, although buffed from TBC, of which had a very simple rotation. The largely fun aspect of this comes from hybrid weaving, in between tanking, going into kitty and doing some damage, or switching out and doing some healing. One of the biggest strengths of the Druid is how simple it is to play. It's got a very simple source of survivability coming from stamina, plus armor, plus dodge. It can be satisfying for players to look at that shapeshifter or master of nature archetype. It can be very good at ad tanking with swipe, the hybrid gearing and playstyle, which means you can switch almost seamlessly from cat to bear specs in terms of gearing with minor changes. It's got really good utility out of form with things like combat res, innovates and tranquilities, and they really are quite easy to gear because you haven't got to worry about things like crit caps or defense caps because you just get these from talents. A weakness for me for this would be it hasn't changed much from TBC. Whilst it has been buffed, it still plays largely the same. There's not much raid utility you can bring whilst in form, in fact there's none really. So if you're main tanking, outside of just doing your job of being the tank, you can't really bring anything else or potentially even save anyone. Whilst its single target threat generation is very, very good, there are tanks that are better, and there's nothing really unique that a bear would bring that would make you take one over, let's say, a Protection Paladin. In terms of notable talent, spells and abilities, of course, all of your forms, bear, cat, flight, aquatic, travel, you name it, you are the real shapeshifter. No matter what the situation, you have a form to tackle it. Unless you need to jump over something really big, because I've always waited for kangaroo form and it never came. Bear abilities are really well designed, and it makes you feel like you are experiencing it from an actual bear perspective. Large roars with berserks, mangles, mauls, swipes. It still does feel satisfying no matter how simple it is to play. And one final notable spell I would say is Tranquility, because it still feels powerful and game-changing if used correctly, or if you do actually get a chance to use it if you was the bear main tank. The DK is the new hero class in Wrath of the Lich King. It uses a rune system and runic power. It has a very interesting storyline and a necromancer-esque backstory, and has the whole immortal feeling once well geared. Some strengths would be it's a very decision-based tank, so how best to use the runes that you've got, or the runic power that you've got, and how are you going to use the next runes that become available. It's a real thinking man's tank. It's definitely got one of the coolest storylines. It starts at 55, which is definitely a strength because skip 55 levels. Blood scales very, very well with gear to feel very strong, almost immortal. Army of the Dead feels like one of the coolest abilities in the game, and it's definitely one of the highest single target threat building tanks in Wrath of the Lich King. One of the weaknesses, which is not really a weakness, but there's likely to be a lot of DKs and a lot of alt DKs, and a lot of them will go tanks. They are quite squishy by nature, especially in low levels of gear, and that's because you're actually a bit of a weird tank. Where most tanks are trying to mitigate as much damage as possible, you're trying to heal as much damage as possible. So you'll take a big chunk of damage, and then you're hoping to be able to heal as much of that back up in the next GCD. Their AoE threat, even though they seem to have lots and lots of AoE abilities with things like Blood Boil and Death and Decay, but actually their threat isn't that great. Some notable talent, spells or abilities: Army of the Dead. I say it again, this feels like actually raising your own army to proceed into battle with, and the animation is very cool. The effect of the ability is cool, and the influence in a fight can be fantastic to watch as well. Raise Ally is worth noting because it's not yet a combat res in Wrath, but you do bring a player back as a ghoul with some unique abilities. Death Grip is one of the coolest abilities in Wrath of the Lich King. Up until Wrath of the Lich King, there was nothing like this, and it's absolutely fantastic. It truly is your Darth Vader moment, force picking someone up and dragging them to your feet. Pestilence is also a great ability, being able to spread your diseases throughout the fight, infecting all enemies, just for that passive cleave. And Death Strike is one of the most powerful abilities throughout Wrath. It heals, it does significant damage, and it just feels incredibly satisfying. And finally, the Warrior, the typical sword and board class. They use Rage just like Feral Druids, but it feels like it just fits better with a Warrior. You almost feel like a Berserker style tank because you're often the highest damage dealing tank, and it's quite simple, but it's very, very rewarding. In my opinion, I believe Warrior to be the most fun tank. Spoiler, we've not finished the video yet. I was going to tell you what the order is at the end. I've touched on the reasons already, but let me explain why. Warriors are typically one of the most popular classes in any RPG. This is believed to be because people can see themselves as that class. None of us have the ability to cast spells or open portals between places. Warriors appeal to a base nature, strength, victory, to be the slayer of dragons and rescuer of princesses, charging headfirst into battle. Warriors in Wrath of the Lich King appeal to this nature fantastically, offering arguably the highest tank damage in the game while showcasing their charge into battle nature. Their satisfying revenge ability, hitting multiple targets after avoiding an attack, something that we can imagine in actual sword and shield combat that occurred for hundreds of years. They're also natural protectors of the group, vigilance for their team, shouts and cries to either buff allies or debuff enemies. Even the abilities used by warriors are named in a way that makes them feel satisfying. Shockwave really does feel like slamming the ground and creating a shockwave. Shield Wall, a famously used military tactic used in medieval combat. Last Stand, the actual feeling of a second wind or surviving against the odds. Devastate, literally an attack that strips the armor of their enemies. Warriors were typically master of arms, often trained in many different forms of combat. We see that in the Wrath of the Lich King warrior as well, using maces, axes, swords, shield, bows, guns, thrown weapons, anything, you name it. They wear the heaviest armor and often the best looking gear actually, and they truly do feel like the juggernaut at the front of the army. So now you already know that I consider warrior to be the most fun tank. What's second, third and fourth? In second, I'd have to put the Paladin. Even though it's not that complex, there is something that I personally find very, very enjoyable about helping out the raid. Being able to cast hands on them to reduce their threat, or redirect their damage to me, or even remove slows and snares. In terms of just tanking a boss and ignoring your raid, they're not that fun, but a Paladin is as fun as you make it. In third place, I would have to put the Druid. So I love the Shapeshifter archetype, and I'm a long-time Druid player, as many of you will know. Quite literally, since vanilla World of Warcraft week 1 of launch, I have been a Druid in every single expansion, in every single iteration of the game, and even on those servers we don't talk about. So I can't put Druid last. You can see this as me being biased, but actually I would much rather play a Druid, and I will find tanking on a Druid more fun than what I've put in last place, which is the Death Knight. They may have the best story and some of the really cool abilities, and I really do love Death Grip, and I really do love Army of the Dead, but I really am not a fan of the rune system or even the runic power. This is definitely just a personal opinion, and you might absolutely love the way the DK tank plays, but I personally don't enjoy it, so I would have to put it in at last place in terms of of fun. If it was DPS, it would be different. DPS DK, loads of fun. Tank, just never got on with it. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, check out Rested XP in the pin comment if you want to level really fast in Wrath of the Lich King. The fastest way to level, what I've seen so far anyway, even outside of getting millions of XP in dungeons. Roll the outro. There's lots of ways you can support the channel to keep me here putting out World of Warcraft content and covering all future MMOs. Consider joining the channel as a member. You get access to emotes, everyone will know you're a member when you comment on future videos because you get a nice icon next to your name, and you get access to members-only videos, which I'll be putting a lot of on the channel throughout the year. Additionally, there's a Patreon link in the description as well. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and I'll see you on the next one.